The alarms screamed through the corridors of Station Epsilon 7 like wounded animals. Emergency lights bathed everything in blood-red shadows as Ambassador Krell's forearms trembled against his control console. His translator crackled with desperate voices from across the galaxy. "Krell, the Void Eaters have consumed the Centauri system. They're not slowing down, Ambassador. Nothing we throw at them even scratches their holes. We've lost contact with 3 more colonies. They're just gone." Krell's compound eyes flickered between the holographic displays floating around him. Each one showed the same terrifying story. Dark, writhing shapes moving between stars, leaving nothing but empty space where entire worlds once thrived. Void Eaters had appeared 6 months ago from the space between galaxies, and now they were devouring everything in their path. "What's our fleet status?" Krell's voice carried the weight of 1,000 dying worlds. Commander Vex, a crystalline being whose body chimed softly with each movement, stepped forward. "We've assembled the largest armada in galactic history. 2 million ships from 47 species, but Ambassador... The crystal structure of Vex's face somehow conveyed deep worry. "We've thrown everything at them. Plasma cannons, quantum, torpedoes, reality-warping weapons. Nothing works. They absorb our energy attacks and shrug off our physical ones." The main view screen showed the assembled fleet, a magnificent sight that would have been cause for celebration in any other circumstance. Ships of every conceivable design floated in perfect formation. The sleek curves of Andromedon cruisers alongside the geometric precision of Zephyrian destroyers. Living bioships from the Hive Collective pulsed with bioluminescent patterns next to the gleaming metal pyramids of the machine worlds. Incoming transmission from the Galactic Council announced the station's AI, its voice somehow managing to sound both mechanical and terrified. The view screen shifted to show the emergency. Council session. Beings from across the galaxy appeared as flickering holograms, some barely recognizable as life forms. Others so alien that translation algorithms struggled to interpret their communications. "The situation is beyond critical," announced Counselor Zeth, the floating energy being who served as current council president. "The Void Eaters have accelerated their consumption rate. At current speed, they will reach the galactic core in 37 standard days." Chorus of despair erupted. From the assembled representatives, some wailed in frequencies that shattered nearby crystal formations. Others expressed their terror through violent color changes or rapid shape-shifting. "We must consider the unthinkable," Counselor Zeth continued, his energy form flickering with uncertainty. "There is... one option we have not explored." The council chamber fell silent. Even the background hum of life support systems seemed to pause. "The Terran contingent," Zeth said, his words hanging in the air like a death sentence. Immediate chaos erupted. Dozens of species began talking at once, their words overlapping in a cacophony of fear and outrage. "Absolutely not. They're too dangerous. We sealed them away for good reason. They nearly destroyed half the galaxy." Ambassador Krell stood slowly, his forearms raised for silence. When the chamber quieted, his voice carried the gravity of someone who had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. "I was there," he said simply. "I was there during the Human-Zarian War. I saw what they could do." His eyes seemed to look into a past that haunted him. "They don't think like us, don't fight like us. When we retreat, they advance. When we surrender, they press harder. When we show them mercy, they show us tactics we never imagined. That's exactly why we put them in cryosleep," shrieked Counselor Hivemind 77, her insectoid form clicking with agitation. "They're unpredictable. Every problem with warfare." "And maybe," Krell said quietly, "that's exactly what we need." The chamber erupted again, but this time the voices were different, desperate, afraid, but also considering. "The Terran contingent has been in cryosleep for 300 years, reported Dr. Synthesis, the AI representative whose holographic form flickered with calculated thought. "They were placed in stasis after the Accords of Titan, where they agreed to voluntary exile in exchange for peace with the Galactic Alliance." "How many?" asked Counselor Zeth. 50,000 humans? Their best military minds, scientists, engineers, and Dr. Synthesis paused. Their most dangerous warriors. Monsters, whispered someone from the back of the chamber. Monsters, Krell. Agreed. But there are monsters. Right now, they might be our only hope. The vote was close. Closer than anyone expected. When the results were tallied, the decision to wake the Terran contingent passed by a single vote. As the council session ended and the holograms flickered out one by one, Krell found himself alone with Commander Vex in the observation deck of Station Epsilon 7. Through the massive transparent aluminum windows, they could see the human cryo facility, a dark, foreboding structure that had been sealed and forgotten for 3 centuries. Vex asked, his crystalline form resonating with uncertainty. Krell watched as the first maintenance drones began moving toward the human facility. I don't know, but I know what happens if we do nothing. The Void Eaters will consume everything. Every world, every species, every dream and hope in the galaxy will be devoured. And if we wake them, and we find out if the humans have learned to control their nature, or if they'll remind us why we feared them in the first place. In the distance, lights began flickering on in the human cryo facility for the first time in 300 years. The hibernation chambers started their revival sequence. And somewhere in the depths of that dark structure, 50,000 humans began the slow journey back to consciousness. The galaxy was about to remember why humanity had once been both its greatest ally and its most terrifying enemy. Hashash Chapter 2, The Awakening Dur. Sarah Chen opened her eyes to darkness and the taste of recycled air. Her throat burned as she tried to speak, producing only a harsh whisper. The cryopod's medical systems hummed around her, monitoring every vital sign as 3 centuries of induced sleep slowly released its grip on her body. Status report, she croaked, her voice growing stronger with each word. Revival process at 87% completion, replied the pod's AI in clinical tones. Muscle atrophy within acceptable parameters. Cognitive function, ... testing now. Sarah's mind felt like it was swimming through thick liquid, but her training kicked in. She began running through memory exercises, mathematical sequences, tactical scenarios. Everything was still there, sharp and ready despite the centuries of sleep. Cognitive function optimal, the AI reported with what might have been surprise. You may exit the pod when ready, Dr. Chen. The pod's lid hissed open, and Sarah sat up slowly, her body protesting after 300 years of stillness. Around her, she could see dozens of other pods beginning their revival sequences. The soft hum of awakening humans filled the air. Coughs, whispers, the occasional curse as someone struggled with the disorientation of waking from cryo-sleep. Well, came a familiar voice from the pod next to hers. But isn't the galaxy's most famous xenobiologist? Sarah turned to see Captain Marcus Wolf emerging from his own pod, his scarred face split by a grin that had terrified enemy commanders across 3 star systems. Despite 3 centuries of sleep, he moved with the fluid grace of a predator. Marcus, Sarah said, unable to hide her smile, still as charming as ever. Someone has to maintain morale, Wolf replied, but his eyes were already scanning the chamber, taking in tactical details. Any idea why they woke us up? Last I remember, we were supposed to stay frozen until the galaxy decided we weren't a threat anymore. Before Sarah could answer, the chamber's main lights activated, revealing the full scope of the cryo facility. Thousands of pods stretched in perfect rows, each one beginning its revival sequence. The sight was both beautiful and terrifying. Humanity's most dangerous individuals, awakening after 3 centuries of enforced peace. Attention all personnel, announced a voice over the facility's communication system. Please report to Briefing Chamber Alpha once you are fully mobile. Priority 1. Sarah and Marcus exchanged glances. They both knew what Priority 1 meant. The galaxy was in trouble. An hour later, the briefing chamber was filled with the strangest collection of humans ever assembled. Military officers sat next to quantum physicists. No, special forces operators. Compared notes with xenobiologists. Engineers debated with philosophers. Despite their different backgrounds, they All shared something that made the rest of the galaxy nervous. They were all uniquely, dangerously human. The chamber's main screen activated, revealing Ambassador Krell. His forearms were folded in what Sarah recognized as a formal greeting posture. But his compound eyes betrayed his nervousness. "Humans of the Terran contingent," Krell began, his translated voice carrying across the chamber. "I am Ambassador Krell of the Galactic Council. You have been awakened because the galaxy faces extinction." A murmur ran through the assembled humans. Sarah noticed that unlike other species, they didn't panic or despair. They leaned forward, interested, calculating. 6 months ago, entities we call the Void Eaters emerged from the space between galaxies. They consume everything in their path: worlds, stars, entire systems. They are immune to our weapons and grow stronger with each system they devour. The screen filled with images of the Void Eaters in action, dark, writhing shapes that seemed to bend light around them, worlds being consumed, leaving nothing but empty space. The assembled humans watched in silence. "Our combined fleets are powerless against them," Krell continued. 2 million ships from 47 species have been destroyed. The Void Eaters will reach the galactic core in 37 days. Colonel Janet Torres, one of humanity's most respected military strategists, stood up. "What makes you think we can succeed where your fleets failed?" Krell's expression was unreadable, but Sarah could sense his discomfort. "Because you think differently than we do. You fight differently. You find solutions where others see only problems." "You mean we're crazy," said Dr. Elena Vasquez. Kez, the quantum physicist who had once theorized that reality could be used as a weapon. "Yes," Krell admitted. "You are completely, utterly insane by galactic standards, and that terrifies us. But right now, terror might be exactly what we need." Captain Wolf stood up, his presence immediately commanding attention. "Show us everything. Every battle, every failed strategy, every piece of data you have on these Void Eaters. If you want us to save your galaxy, we need to understand what we're fighting." For the next 6 hours, the humans absorbed information at a rate that amazed their galactic observers. They asked questions no one else had thought to ask. They saw patterns in the Void Eaters' behavior that had escaped the analysis of the galaxy's greatest minds. "They're not random," Sarah observed, studying the consumption patterns. "Look at the sequence. They're not just eating everything, they're being selective. They're avoiding certain types of star systems." "Pulsars," noted Dr. Vasquez. "They're avoiding pulsars in anything with high electromagnetic radiation." "That's not avoidance," Wolf said quietly. "That's strategy. They're saving the high-energy systems for last." The humans continued their analysis, building theories and strategies with a speed that made their observers nervous. They were connecting dots that no one else had even seen. "We need to see them in action," announced General Patricia Hayes, the woman who had once held off an entire alien armada with nothing but a handful of destroyers, an absolute refusal to accept defeat. "Not recordings. Real-time engagement." Krell's compound eyes widened. "That would require taking you to the front lines. It's incredibly dangerous." "Dangerous is what we do," Wolf replied with a grin that reminded everyone in the room why humans had once been both feared and respected across the galaxy. "Very well," Krell said, though his tone suggested he already regretted the decision. "We'll take you to the Outer Rim. The Void Eaters are currently consuming the Kepler system. You can observe from a safe distance." "Safe distance?" Dr. Vasquez laughed. "Ambassador, you clearly don't understand humans very well. We don't observe from safe distances. Get close enough to see the whites of their eyes." "They don't have eyes," Krell protested. "Then we'll get close enough to see whatever they have instead," Sarah said, and for the first time in 3 centuries, she felt truly alive as the humans prepared to leave their cryo facility. Word spread. Throughout the galaxy, the Terran contingent was awake. Humanity's most dangerous individuals were once again free to exercise their particular brand of problem-solving. Some species prayed that the humans would save them. Others prayed that they wouldn't succeed too well. And a few, those who remembered the old days, prayed that waking the humans wouldn't prove to be a mistake worse than the Void Eaters themselves. The transport ship Galactic Unity waited in the docking bay, its mixed crew of various species, eyeing the approaching humans with a mixture of curiosity and fear. As the humans boarded, their casual confidence and easy camaraderie stood in stark contrast to the desperate tension that had gripped the galaxy for months. Next stop, the Kepler system, announced the ship's captain, a nervous Zephyrian whose geometric form kept shifting between stability and anxiety. Estimated arrival time, 18 hours. 18 hours to figure out how to kill something that's immune to every weapon in the galaxy, Wolf mused as he settled into his seat. Like a Tuesday, actually, Sarah said, consulting her chronometer. It is Tuesday. The laughter that followed was uniquely human, not the panicked hysteria of a species facing extinction, but the genuine amusement of a people who had looked death in the face so many times that they'd learned to find it funny. As the ship jumped to hyperspace, carrying humanity's most dangerous representatives toward humanity's most impossible challenge, the galaxy held its breath. In 36 days, the Void Eaters would reach the galactic core. In 18 hours, they would discover if humanity could provide the miracle everyone desperately needed, or if they would simply provide a different kind of catastrophe entirely. Chapter 3, First Contact, the Galactic Unity dropped out of hyperspace. At the edge of the Kepler system, and the humans got their first look at the Void Eaters in action, the sight rendered even the most experienced veterans speechless. Where the fourth planet of Kepler had been just hours before, there was now nothing but a swirling vortex of darkness. The Void Eater responsible for the consumption writhed through space like a living shadow, its form defying every law of physics the humans thought they understood. It was simultaneously solid and incorporeal, massive and tiny, there and not there. Jesus, whispered Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, the man who had once survived a black hole collapse by jury-rigging a escape pod into a temporal displacement device. It's beautiful. It's terrifying, corrected Dr. Vasquez, but her voice carried the same awe. Same thing, Morrison replied, his eyes never leaving the VIE-WSCR-EEN. Captain Wolf stood behind them, his tactical mind already working. How big is it? I can't get a scale reference. The dark matter displacement suggests it's roughly the size of Earth's moon, reported the ship's science officer, a multi-eyed Kandorian whose species had once been renowned for their precision. But that measurement keeps fluctuating. Sometimes it appears smaller than a city, sometimes larger than a planet. It's not changing size, Sarah said quietly. It's changing dimensions. Look at the way it moves. It's not traveling through space. It's folding space around itself. The assembled humans watched as the Void Eater completed its consumption of Kepler-4 and began moving toward the next planet. Its movement was hypnotic, like watching a predator that existed in dimensions beyond normal perception. Fleet positions, Wolf asked. The Andromedan Third Fleet is maintaining position at the system's edge, reported Commander Vex, over the communication system. They're preparing for a standard engagement pattern. Standard engagement pattern? Dr. Vasquez looked up from her readings. What's standard about this? Formation Delta 7, Vex explained. Concentrated firepower from multiple vectors, followed by defensive retreat if the initial assault fails. Formation Delta 7, Wolf repeated slowly. That's for fighting ships. Normal three-dimensional ships that follow the laws of physics. It's all we know, admitted Vex. It's suicide, Sarah said bluntly. Watch the way it moves, every time. Your ship's fire, it absorbs the energy and becomes more solid, more real. You're not fighting it, you're feeding it. On the view screen, the Andromedan fleet began their attack. Thousands of ships moved into formation, their weapons charging with the distinctive hum of quantum cannons. The sight was magnificent. A testament to the unity and determination of galactic civilization, the first salvo struck the Void Eater directly. Plasma beams, photon torpedoes, and reality-warping missiles converged on the entity in a display of firepower that could have shattered planets. The Void Eater absorbed every shot. Instead of being damaged, it seemed to grow more substantial, more real. Its form solidified, becoming darker and more defined against the starfield. It's like feeding a fire, Morrison observed. The more energy you give it, the stronger it gets. But look at this, Sarah said, pointing to her scanner readings. When it's fully fed, when it's most solid, it also becomes most vulnerable to physical interaction. See how it's starting to interact with the gravitational fields of nearby planets? The second wave of attacks came from the Zephyrian geometric ships, their crystal-based weapons firing in perfect mathematical patterns. Again, the Void Eater absorbed the energy, growing larger and more solid. "They're doing it all wrong," Wolf said, his voice carrying the frustration of watching a perfectly good fleet commit suicide. "Can we communicate with them?" "This is Galactic Unity to Andromedan Command," announced the ship's captain. "We have tactical observations from the Terran contingent." "Negative Unity," came the reply. "Maintain safe distance? We have the situation under control." "Under control?" Wolf's voice rose. "You're feeding the damn thing?" "Captain Wolf," interrupted Admiral Vex of the Andromedan fleet, his translated voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded fleets for centuries. "We appreciate the Terran contingent's interest, but we are following established protocols." "Protocols?" Sarah leaned forward. "Admiral, this entity operates outside normal physical laws. Your protocols are designed for conventional warfare against conventional enemies." "Dr. Chen," the Admiral replied with barely concealed condescension, "we have been conducting space warfare for millennia. We understand tactics, not these tactics," Wolf said grimly. "You're about to lose your entire fleet, and you're going to make that thing stronger in the process." The third wave of attacks began. Bioships from the Hive Collective launched swarms of living missiles while the machine world's geometric destroyers fired their reality-incurring weapons. The result was the same. The Void Eater absorbed every form of energy, growing larger and more solid with each passing second. "It's about to reach critical mass," Dr. Vasquez announced, her voice tight with concern. "When it becomes fully solid, it's going to be able to project force through normal space." As if responding to her words, the Void Eater suddenly extended tendrils of darkness toward the attacking fleet. The tendrils moved faster than light, reaching across millions of kilometers in seconds. All ships, evasive maneuvers. Admiral Vex commanded, but it was too late. The tendrils touched the nearest Andromedan cruiser, and the ship simply disappeared. Not destroyed, not vaporized. It was as if it had never existed. The other ships tried to retreat, but more tendrils were already reaching for them. "We have to do something," Sarah said, her hands flying over her console. "I'm reading massive dimensional instabilities. If it consumes the entire fleet, it'll have enough energy to split into multiple entities." "Multiple?" Wolf's voice was deadly quiet. "How many?" "Based on the energy absorption rate, ... dozens, maybe hundreds." The bridge fell silent. Everyone understood the implications. Instead of facing one Void Eater, the galaxy would face an army of them. Captain Wolf said to the ship's commander, "I need you to take us closer." Closer. The Zephyrian's geometric form flickered with terror. "That would be suicide. Not if we're right about what we're seeing," Sarah said. "We need to get close. Enough to scan it when it's at maximum solidity. If our theory is correct, that's when it's most vulnerable. And if your theory is wrong, then we'll find out what the inside of a Void Eater looks like," Morrison said cheerfully. "Could be interesting." The ship's captain looked around at the assembled humans. They were all completely calm, as if approaching an entity that had just erased a dozen starships was a perfectly normal Tuesday afternoon activity. "Humans," the captain muttered in his native language, which the translators rendered as something between insane and magnificent. "Full speed ahead," Wolf ordered. "And open a channel to the Andromedan fleet. This is Captain Wolf of the Terran contingent to all fleet units. Cease fire immediately. I repeat, cease all attacks on the Void Eater." "But his captain, Admiral." Dex replied, "Cannot allow it to consume more ships uncontested." Admiral Sarah's voice cut through the communication channel like a blade. "Every shot you fire makes it stronger. You're not fighting it, you're feeding it. Stop shooting, and it will begin to lose cohesion." That's not how warfare works, the Admiral protested. This isn't warfare, Wolf replied. This is something else entirely. Trust us. Human ship continued its approach toward the Void Eater, which was now fully solid and extending tendrils toward the remaining fleet ships. But as the weapons fire ceased, something unexpected happened. The Void Eater began to slow its consumption. Its form started to waver, becoming less solid. Energy levels dropping, reported Dr. Vasquez. It's losing cohesion without the weapons fire to sustain it. But it's still dangerous, Sarah added. And it's still consuming the planet. Now we see what it really is, Wolf said, his eyes fixed on the entity as it writhed through space. Now we figure out how to kill it. The Void Eater, perhaps sensing the approaching human ship, turned its attention toward them. Tendrils of darkness reached out across space, moving with impossible speed toward the galactic unity. Evasive maneuvers, shouted the captain. No, Wolf said quietly. Hold course, Captain. Those tendrils will destroy us. Not if we're right, Sarah said, her voice steady despite the proximity of certain death. Not if we're right about what? They really are. The tendrils reached the ship, and passed through it harmlessly. Fascinating, Dr. Vasquez murmured. It's losing dimensional coherence. Without sustained energy input, it can't maintain its ability to interact with our reality. But it's still consuming the planet, Morrison observed. Because the planet is providing energy, Sarah realized. The mass energy conversion of matter into void stuff doesn't need weapons fire if it has a planet to eat. So how do we stop it? Wolf asked. Sarah smiled, and for the first time in 3 centuries, it was the smile that had once made enemy commanders surrender rather than face whatever she was about to do. We give it something it can't digest, she said. Something that will make it very, very sick. The humans began to plan, and for the first time since the Void Eaters had appeared, someone in the galaxy was actually smiling. Chapter 4. The Human Solution 3 days later. The humans had converted a section of Station Epsilon 7 into something that would have made the galaxy's safety inspectors flee in terror. Dr. Vasquez stood before a device that looked like it had been designed by someone who had read physics textbooks backwards while having a fever dream. Explain to me again why this won't destroy the galaxy, Ambassador Krell said, his forearms folded in what Sarah now recognized as his deeply concerned posture. Because, Dr. Vasquez replied cheerfully, the cascade effect will be limited. To the target's dimensional matrix? Probably. Okay, definitely. Well, mostly definitely. Look, the math checks out and that's what matters. Sarah looked up from her own console where she was preparing what she had cheerfully nicknamed Project Indigestion. The beauty of the plan is that it uses the Void Eater's own feeding mechanism against it. Instead of trying to destroy it with energy, which just makes it stronger, we're going to feed it something it can't process. Which is? Krell asked, though his tone suggested he wasn't sure he wanted to know. Paradox, Morrison said from across the room where he was calibrating. Something that hummed with barely contained temporal energy. Pure, concentrated paradox. That's not a real thing, protested Dr. Synthesis. The AI representative who had been observing the humans with growing fascination and horror. It is now, Wolf said, reviewing the tactical deployment plans. Blaine has figured out how to weaponize contradictory quantum states. We're going to feed the Void Eater something that simultaneously exists and doesn't exist. It's both energy and matter, and violates causality in 17 different ways. What happens when it tries to digest that? Krell asked. Sarah said. Thoughtfully, if our calculations are correct, it should experience the equivalent of cosmic indigestion. The paradox will propagate through its dimensional matrix, causing it to literally tie itself in knots. And if your calculations are wrong, then we'll have created the galaxy's first paradox-powered Void Eater, Morrison said. Which would actually be kind of cool from a scientific standpoint. But unlikely to help with our survival, Krell pointed out. Unlikely, yes, Sarah agreed, but not impossible. That's the thing about paradoxes. They make everything uncertain, including their own effects. The plan was typically human in its combination of brilliant insight and complete disregard for conventional wisdom. Instead of trying to fight the Void Eater, they were going to give it exactly what it wanted. Nice, tasty meal. The fact that the meal would be a concentrated dose of logical impossibility was just an added bonus. The delivery system is ready, announced Chief Engineer Rodriguez, who had somehow managed to turn a standard probe into a self-guiding paradox generator. We've got 17 different kinds of impossibility packed into a single delivery vehicle. Favorite is the temporal loop, Morrison said. The probe will deliver the paradox to the Void Eater 5 minutes before it launches. The causality violation alone should give it serious indigestion. Assuming it doesn't just absorb the paradox and become even more dangerous, Krell muttered. That's the beauty of it, Dr. Vasquez explained. You can't absorb a paradox without becoming one yourself, and paradoxes are inherently unstable. They tend to resolve themselves in ways that make everyone involved very confused, including us, especially us, Sarah said. But we're used to being confused. It's part of the human condition. The fleet had assembled at the edge of the Kepler system, now reinforced with ships from 6 more species. The Void Eater had consumed 3 more planets and was working on the 4th. It had also begun exhibiting new behaviors, creating smaller versions of itself that were spreading to nearby systems. It's reproducing, Dr. Vasquez observed, or budding, or whatever it is that cosmic horrors do when they're well fed. The offspring are smaller but faster, Wolf noted. And they're not waiting for their parent to finish with this system. They're spreading out looking for new feeding grounds. Which means we need to act now, Sarah said, before the infestation spreads too far to contain. The humans had insisted on taking a small, fast ship to deliver their paradox probe personally. The galactic commanders had objected, but the humans had pointed out that they were the only ones who understood the device well enough to deploy it properly. Besides, Wolf had said, if this doesn't work, you'll want us close enough to the Void Eater to see what went wrong. For science, now the human ship Impossible Odds, hastily renamed from Galactic Unity, at Sarah's insistence was approaching the Void Eater. The entity had grown to the size of a small moon and was currently working on consuming Kepler-2, a gas giant that was providing it with enormous amounts of energy. Paradox probe is ready for deployment, Rodriguez announced. All 17 impossibilities are stable and ready to cause massive conceptual damage. Define stable? Krell asked nervously. They're not actively destroying reality, Morrison replied. Yet launch when ready, Wolf ordered. The probe launched from the asterisk Impossible Odds asterisk and immediately began exhibiting the behaviors that made it so dangerous. It accelerated toward the Void Eater while simultaneously moving away from it. It existed in multiple dimensions while occupying no space at all. It carried information about its own destruction while being completely indestructible. It's beautiful, Dr. Vasquez whispered. A perfect impossibility. The Void Eater noticed the approaching probe and extended tendrils toward it. The tendrils touched the probe and immediately began to writhe in confusion. The probe was simultaneously absorbed and repelled, consumed and rejected. Energy readings are spiking, Sarah reported. The Void Eater is trying to process the paradox, but it's running into logical contradictions. What kind of contradictions? Krell asked. Well, for starters, it's trying to convert the probe into void stuff, while the probe insists that it's actually made of crystallized mathematics. Meanwhile, the probe is telling the Void Eater that it has already been consumed while simultaneously, proving that consumption is impossible. And the temporal loop? That's the best part, Morrison said gleefully. The probe is delivering itself to the Void Eater 5 minutes before it was launched, which means the Void Eater is trying to consume something that won't exist for another 5 minutes while dealing with the fact that it's already been consumed. The Void Eater's form began to fluctuate wildly. Its solid shape wavered between dimensions, becoming more and more unstable as it tried to process the paradox probe. It's working, Sarah said. The paradox is propagating through its dimensional matrix. It's literally trying to turn itself inside out. Is that good or bad? Krell asked. For us, good for the Void Eater, a very, very bad. It's experiencing the equivalent of cosmic nausea. The Void Eater's consumption of Kepler-2 suddenly stopped. The entity began to convulse, its form writhing as it tried to resolve the logical contradictions that were now part of its essential nature. The offspring are being affected too, Wolf observed. The paradox is spreading to them through their connection to the parent. That's not possible, Dr. Synthesis protested. Paradoxes should be contained to their point of origin. That's what makes them paradoxes, Sarah replied. They don't follow rules about what's possible. The Void Eater suddenly contracted, its massive form collapsing in on itself. But instead of disappearing, it began to unravel. Its impossible geometry became even more impossible as it tried to exist and not exist simultaneously. It's caught in a logical loop, Dr. Vasquez announced. Can't resolve the paradox without ceasing to exist, but it can't cease to exist without resolving the paradox. So what happens now? Krell asked. Now, Sarah said with satisfaction, it gets to spend eternity trying to figure out how to digest something that's mathematically impossible to digest. The Void Eater's form stabilized into something that hurt to look at, a knot of twisted space-time that existed in a state of permanent impossibility. It was still there, but it was also not there. It was consuming reality while simultaneously proving that reality couldn't be consumed. The offspring are experiencing the same effect, Wolf reported. They're all caught in the same paradox loop. So we've won, Krell asked hopefully. We've created a stable impossibility, Sarah corrected, which is almost as good as winning, with the added benefit of being completely unprecedented in galactic history. And the Void Eater is now spending eternity trying to solve an unsolvable problem? It's not exactly defeated, but it's definitely not consuming any more planets. The humans watched their handiwork with satisfaction. The Void Eater twisted and writhed in its paradox loop, completely unable to continue its consumption of the galaxy, while simultaneously unable to stop trying. I have to admit, Krell said slowly, this is not how I expected this crisis to be resolved. That's the thing about humans, Wolf replied. We don't solve problems the way other species do. Don't try to overpower the enemy or outsmart them. We just make them so confused that they forget what they were trying to do in the first place. Is that your official military doctrine? Krell asked. One of them, Sarah said. We also have, when in doubt, blow something up, and if you can't solve a problem, make it someone else's problem. That last one doesn't seem very helpful in this situation, Krell observed. Oh, but it is, Morrison said with a grin. It just made the paradox the Void Eater's problem instead of ours. As they watched, more Void Eaters began appearing throughout the galaxy, but each one immediately became caught in the same paradox loop as soon as it tried to feed. Impossibility was spreading like a virus through their collective consciousness, turning the galaxy's greatest threat into a collection of frustrated cosmic entities trying to solve unsolvable puzzles. Fleet status report, Wolf requested. All ships are maintaining safe distance, came the reply from Admiral Vex. The Void Eaters are, well, they're just sitting there, twitching. Twitching is good, Sarah said. Twitching means they're still trying to process the paradox. As long as they're doing that, they can't consume anything. But they're not gone, Krell pointed out. They're still there, still dangerous. True, Sarah admitted. But now they are kind of dangerous, unpredictable, illogical, and completely focused on solving a problem that has no solution. In other words, they're honorary humans now. The communication channel crackled with reports from across the galaxy. Void Eaters everywhere had stopped their consumption and were now caught in various states of paradox-induced confusion. Were trying to eat themselves. Others were attempting to exist in negative dimensions. Few had apparently decided that the best solution was to become abstract concepts rather than physical entities. The crisis appears to be over, Dr. Synthesis announced. The immediate threat has been neutralized. Neutralized? Yes, Wolf said, but not eliminated. We need to figure out what to do with several hundred paradox-infected cosmic entities. Actually, Dr. Vasquez said thoughtfully, I have an idea about that. Epilogue. New beginnings. 6 months later. Sarah stood in the observation deck of the newly constructed Paradox Research Station, watching the Void Eaters through reinforced transparent aluminum. The entities had been relocated to a specially prepared pocket dimension, where they could wrestle with their logical contradictions without bothering anyone. How are our patients today? Asked Dr. Martinez, the xenopsychologist who had volunteered to study the paradox-affected Void Eaters. Frustrated, Sarah replied, Entity number 7 has been trying to consume its own tail for 3 weeks now. It's making progress, but every time it succeeds, it discovers that it never s. Tarted, and the others? Entity number 12 has decided it's actually a small potted plant and is demanding photosynthesis. Number 15 is attempting to file a formal complaint about the logical inconsistencies in its existence. 3 has apparently become a philosopher. A philosopher? It keeps asking why it exists, if existence is impossible. We've been having some very interesting conversations. Dr. Martinez shook his head in amazement. Only humans would turn a galactic extinction event into a research opportunity. We prefer to think of it as aggressive problem-solving, Sarah said. Besides, the Void Eaters seem happier this way. They're not destroying anything, and they're getting to explore fundamental questions about the nature of reality. The observation window. They could see entity number 7. Pause in its tail-consuming efforts to contemplate the philosophical implications of self-consumption. It appeared to be taking notes. Speaking of philosophical implications, Dr. Martinez said, "What's the status on the integration protocols?" Sarah smiled. Better than expected. The Galactic Council has officially invited humanity to rejoin galactic civilization. No more cryo sleep, no more exile. We're full members again. And the other species aren't terrified of us anymore? Oh, they're still terrified, Sarah admitted. But now it's the good kind of terror. It's the kind that comes from knowing we're on their side. The door to the observation deck opened, and Captain Wolf entered, carrying a datapad and wearing the expression of someone who had just received very interesting news. "Sarah, we've got a situation," he said. "The Quantum Collective has reported some unusual readings from the Andromeda Galaxy." "What kind of unusual?" "The kind that suggests something even weirder than Void Eaters is heading our way." "Something that exists in 11 dimensions simultaneously and appears to be made of crystallized time." Sarah's eyes lit up with the kind of enthusiasm that had once made enemy commanders consider early retirement. "Crystallized time? That's fascinating. Are they hostile?" "Unknown. They're approaching at faster than light speed, while somehow moving backwards through causality." Sarah said, practically bouncing with excitement. "A temporal paradox entity. We've never dealt with one of those before." Wolf grinned. "Was hoping you'd say that." "The Council is requesting Terran contingent assistance." "Of course they are," Sarah said. "When the galaxy faces something impossible, dangerous, and completely unprecedented, who else are they going to call? The people crazy enough to solve it," Wolf replied. As they prepared to leave the observation deck, entity number 7 managed to catch their attention. The Void Eater had somehow arranged parts of itself to spell out a message in 3-dimensional space. "Thank you for the existential crisis. It's very educational." "You're welcome," Sarah called back. "Keep working on that self-consumption paradox. I think you're really onto something." The entity pulsed with what might have been appreciation, then returned to its impossible task of eating itself, while simultaneously proving that such consumption was logically impossible. "So," Wolf said, as they walked toward the transport bay, "crystallized time entities that move backwards through causality." "Any initial thoughts?" "Just one," Sarah replied. "We're going to need more paradoxes." Behind them, the paradox research station hummed with the sound of impossible things happening in perfectly logical ways. The Void Eaters continued their eternal struggle with unsolvable problems, occasionally pausing to engage in philosophical debates about the nature of existence with their human observers. And somewhere in the depths of space, the galaxy's newest impossible threat was approaching, completely unaware that it was about to encounter the one species in the universe that considered impossible threats to be interesting puzzles rather than extinction events. The humans were awake. Humanity was free, and the galaxy was about to be reminded once again why the most terrifying words in any language were, "Hold my beer and watch this." In the end, the crisis that had threatened to consume everything had instead given the galaxy something it had never had before: a species so fundamentally illogical that they could solve problems by making them more confusing rather than less. And, as entity number 7, finally succeeded in consuming its own tail, while simultaneously proving that it had never had a tail to begin with. It occurred to the researchers that perhaps the greatest victory wasn't defeating the impossible. Perhaps the greatest victory was teaching the impossible to defeat itself. The galaxy was safe, the humans were home, and somewhere in 11 dimensions, a crystallized time entity was about to discover that moving backwards through causality was nothing compared to dealing with a species that had weaponized confusion itself. It was, by any measure, a very human solution to a very inhuman problem. And that, as entity number 7 would have noted, if it wasn't busy not existing while proving its own existence, was exactly the point.